like to begin by saying a very, very special welcome to Anat Bar-Cohen, who is president of Generations After, who, as many of you know, has been battling cancer. And this is the first program in a while that she's been able to join us for. So Anat, welcome. And welcome to all of you for joining us this afternoon for our important and timely program on the current state and future of Holocaust education. I'm Dina Hirsch, Vice President of the Generations After. A 2020 study by the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany found that 63% of the 11,000 people surveyed between the ages of 18 and 39 didn't know that 6 million Jews were murdered in the Shoah. 11% thought that the Jews actually caused the Holocaust. Are you aware that only 20 of our 50 states mandate Holocaust education, although a few others do encourage and endorse it? Maryland is not among those 20 states, nor does DC mandate it. Our cherished survivors, who are the single most valuable means of educating people about the Holocaust, very sadly, are dwindling in number. All of this begs the question, what is the state of Holocaust education in our country, and where do we go from here? What is our role in this critical process? To answer those and other questions, we are pleased to have with us today Nikki Korsen and Jennifer Lemberg. Gen After member Nikki Korsen is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor and 11th year English teacher at Dominion High School in Sterling, Virginia. She's a teacher consultant with the Shenandoah Valley National Writing Project, a U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum trained tour guide, and a Holocaust educator trained through programs in Israel, Yad Vashem, New York, TOLI, about which you will hear more this afternoon, and Washington, D.C., Belfer. She's a satellite leader for TOLI teacher seminars in Virginia, focusing on both the Holocaust and Virginia's history of racial injustice. Nikki has published several recent articles in educational journals about the importance of Holocaust education. Her late father, Jack Wagshaw, is featured in the regional Emmy Award-winning Loudoun County Public Schools documentary, A Journey of Remembrance, about the Adopted Survivor program that Nikki facilitates at Dominion High School. Jennifer Lemberg received her PhD in English and a certificate in Women's Studies from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. She also holds a certificate from the International Trauma Studies Program and has published essays on Holocaust literature and American Indian literature, in addition to her work with TOLI, where she is the Associate Director of U.S. Programs. Jennifer has taught interdisciplinary seminars, composition, American women's literature, and American Indian literature. She co-edited Becoming a Holocaust Educator, Purposeful Pedagogy Through Inquiry, which was released last October. The link to that book should be in the chat. Following the interview, our guest speakers will be happy to entertain your questions in a Q&A session, so we ask you to please write them in the chat as we go along. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to turn the program over to Nikki Korsen and Jennifer Lemberg.
Hi, everyone. I want to second Dina's welcome to Anat. Anat, I'm so glad that you're joining us today. That makes this program even more special. And thank you for having us. When Dina, Rachel, and Shelley first suggested this idea to me as a program, I was more than happy to bring my classroom and personal experience to the table. But I knew that for this group in particular, survivors, 2Gs, 3Gs, and others with various personal connections, that you would want and deserve more. So I reached out to my friend and colleague, Jennifer Lemberg, who is one of the driving forces of the TOLI organization. I'll let her tell you more about TOLI, but it is because of them that I figured out what my role as a 2G should and could be, especially when it comes to Holocaust education. So with Jennifer's vision and my day-to-day experiences, we hope to shed some light on this difficult topic that is so close to all of our hearts. With that, I give you Jennifer.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Nikki, and thanks to everyone at the organization for having me here. And I learn as much from Nikki as you can imagine, based on her experience and her classroom work. So we've already talked about this, so I'll move us right along. So a little bit about TOLI, which Dina and Nicole just mentioned. We are named after Olga Lengyel, who is a Holocaust survivor who was sent to Auschwitz, where she lost all of her family, but survived herself and went on to write about her experience and eventually to move to New York City, where she founded an organization and left a legacy devoted to Holocaust education with the firm belief that education would help to prevent future atrocities from happening. Several years after her death, TOLI began offering summer seminars for teachers in New York City, what we now call our flagship program, but was then our only program. It's an 11-day intensive seminar for teachers from around the United States, directed by Sandra Pearl, who was a professor of mine at the Graduate Center. And I came on as a kind of co-director after attending the very first seminar in 2006, which was then 5 days. We went to a national 11-day program the following summer. It is a competitive program. Teachers apply to come to us. We house them in New York City, and they spend days and days thinking together about how best to teach the Holocaust. So I'll just mention a few things about TOLI that we feel very special about our program. One is that we really emphasize and prioritize the use of inquiry and writing in our seminars. We partner closely, or we've worked very closely with the National Writing Project, partly due to Sandra Pearl's background. And so we share the Writing Project's vision of writing as a way to learn and engage deeply with just about any subject, really with any subject. And the notion that, working with teachers to articulate their own stance in regards to the Holocaust, why it matters to them, what about it matters to them, will help them do a better job with their teaching and also offer models for their classroom work that they can bring back with them when they go home. Several years after our first seminars in New York, we launched what we call our satellite seminar program. And those programs, actually I want to go back to the other thing about TOLI that is represented here on the screen before I mention that, which is TOLI also brings into our seminars the notion that learning about Jewish life both before and after the Holocaust is very important to Holocaust studies. So you see on the slide I'm sharing here a Zoom photo with a lot of people holding challah bread, and that was from our virtual seminar last summer, which we held instead of an in-person program in New York City. And we had our participants all around the United States synchronously bake challah across the day as we also did our Holocaust studies. So we would learn and study and hear from speakers and write, take a break, knead, come back to the screen, and so many teachers, most of them not Jewish, were in their kitchens baking challah together as they learned about Jewish life, as they studied the Holocaust, as they thought about ways that they could bring these kinds of practices to their classroom. So those are two things to know about TOLI. And then, in addition to the program in New York, we do have what we call our satellite programs, which are regional programs, usually about 5 days, some of them residential, some of them not. And those are led, importantly, by teachers from those states. So Nicole, for instance, came to New York, emerged as a leader, came back to us for further professional development, and now runs a seminar for teachers in her own home state, so she can both lead them and both relate very closely to them as someone who does that classroom work. And very proudly, I'll mention the book, Becoming a Holocaust Educator, which came out last fall, is a volume of essays by teachers within the TOLI program, just about all the leaders of the kind of seminars I've just mentioned, and really speaking directly from their classroom experience, what it's like to teach about this subject, how they use inquiry in the classroom. And while it's a book that we very much imagined as being for educators, it's also one that might speak to regular readers too who are on this call, if you want to learn about what is it like for teachers right now, this is, 15 chapters by teachers doing this work right now and what they grapple with and why it's meaningful to them. So it's really a beautiful and very meaningful project for us to partner with the Writing Project and work with our teachers and bring their voices forward. So that's a little bit about TOLI and our work. And it's wonderful to see all that Nicole has been doing, and I will turn things back over to her now so she can speak a bit more about that. And I will advance our slides.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. As many of you know, I am the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. That's him right there in the red jacket. Some of you may have known my dad, Jack Wagshaw, or my mom, Brenda, as they were longtime Silver Spring residents. It is coming up on a year since my dad passed, and 9 for my mom. So you know that first year without a parent or any loved one is always full of those painful firsts. First Thanksgiving, first Seder, first Father's Day, which is actually going to be the day of his unveiling. And that first family milestone that they won't be at. And in our case, that's my oldest son's college graduation, which is happening later this week. But in the case of a Holocaust survivor, there's a different type of first. This was the first year my dad has not spoken to my high school students. We were blessed to welcome Louise Lawrence Israels to our school this year. Thank you, Louise. She told me she'd be on this call. But as we are all too painfully aware, our time facilitating conversations between those who were there and those who may not have even heard of the Holocaust is dwindling, which is why we're here today. When I first became a 9th grade English teacher 11 years ago, I was transitioning from a stint in corporate America and then a stint as a stay-at-home mom. While I was home, I became a volunteer tour guide at the Holocaust Museum in DC. And it was that singular experience, watching how these inner city students that we took through the permanent exhibit morphed from a group of disinterested, kind of impatient teenagers to curious, concerned citizens just during that 2-hour exhibit. And that is what made me pursue a career in education. So after that, I got a teaching job, and I quickly discovered how many paths actually lead to lessons on intolerance. I then participated in the National Writing Project, which you've been hearing a lot about, because I do believe in the power of the written word, both for my students and for myself. And then the National Writing Project led me to TOLI, which brings me to today, where I, as Jennifer said, lead a annual local seminar for teachers of all faiths and all disciplines who agree with TOLI's mission that never again begins in the classroom. So having said that, we wanted to share today's goals with you. And what we hope to do is really kind of give you an idea of what is happening out there in today's classrooms, current practices, some of the challenges that are being faced, and there are a lot of opportunities in this respect. There really are. So when we talk about the challenges, just know that there is a light at, hopefully at the end of the tunnel. And then because we know how important these survivor legacies are, we're going to talk about ways to, how as descendants of Holocaust victims and survivors, that we can really honor those and keep those in education. But we want to do so in an appropriate way, and we want to do so in a way that they are used as learning tools for future generations. And then the picture there, so Jennifer showed you her group making challah. They did it from scratch. This was my first cohort group. That's downtown Leesburg, Virginia. And we got them challahs, although ours came from Wegmans, so not quite as homemade. But again, a non-Jewish group of educators who simply share the passion that we have about teaching about the Holocaust. So that's the end of our week. And they're holding their certificates and they're holding their halas as we get ready to, as we kind of culminated our week of learning together. So the next thing we're going to do is whenever we are teaching about the Holocaust to any group of learners, it's really important to set an appropriate tone from the start. And this is a way that we bring in voices and bring in vulnerabilities and set realistic expectations. So I'm going to ask Shelley Klein to go ahead and read the words of this piece out loud to the group, so it can sort of get us in a collective headspace as we sort of begin this time together today. So I will mute and turn it to you, Shelley.
Thank you. So this poem is called Invitation to Brave Space by Mickey Scott Bay Jones. Together we will create brave space, because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. The space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side.
Jennifer, I think you have the next slide.
We do, and I do, thank you. And I want to thank you, Shelley, for reading that so nicely. And I want to mention that some people on the call may be familiar with this poem, which is, taken on real life and traction in a lot of educational spaces, which has been very helpful. And that also this notion of kind of thinking about our community and how we hold the space together, to me, is a very emblematic kind of teaching moment that TOLI also practices, right? That, we enter the space together, we try to, as best we can on Zoom, but try to attend to the people who are here, to think about the fact that we're dealing with sensitive material that may register very differently for you than it does for your neighbor sitting next to you or for someone across the room. And, I'll talk later about the need for support for teachers and community, but this kind of community building moment is really important in the work that we do and the work that teachers engage in meaningfully, I think, in our programs. So thinking beyond us for a little while, Nikki and I wanted to start with what we felt like would be some promising developments. And I realized that I'm framing this in a sort of different way. On this slide, Dina said, only 20 states have mandates. And I'm saying, look, 20 states have mandates. So it's really interesting, like, how do we grapple with this factor? What do we make of this? But we'll start first on the federal level. Many of you may be familiar with the recent passage of the Never Again Education Act, which was enacted in 2020. This is a federal provision of $10 million over 5 years to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, or the USHMM, which is expanding their programming, as we have mentioned here, with the requirement to develop and distribute resources, to make more and more materials available on their website, and expand professional development for teachers on all kinds of levels. And they've been extremely busy. They're working with, what it means to receive this kind of funding, how best to use it, and they've been really rigorous in reaching out to and speaking to representatives in Holocaust education all across the country. And, so when we think about promising developments, we think this is a serious amount of funding being, allocated for this work, with people that I know and trust, working hard on how best to make use of this funding and afford resources to teachers and students. So I think we can see that as encouraging. And then, we have 20 state mandates listed under promising developments, and maybe there's an argument against that, but, the number has been increasing relatively quickly these last few years. I will say there's plenty of movement in the states that don't have mandates yet, and movement on the national level to advocate for, what a national kind of mandate might look like if there should be such a thing. I mean, these are really lively questions. So I think even in the arguing that happens around whether we should, how we should, what it would mean and what it would look like, I see a kind of vigorous, encouraging, wonderful sort of lively engagement among teachers, among supporters, among, communities like this one who are here to think about how we teach about the subject. So for Nikki and I, as we were talking, like, how can we offer a Zoom on a really complicated subject? What is the state of Holocaust education today, right? This troubles us. This sits with all of us on this call. And we wanted to make sure that we looked honestly and openly about what's difficult, but also that we started with, that's almost half the states in the nation, sort of saying this is a required part of your curriculum. That feels like a very real and concrete development to us. It's meaningful. So that was where we were with that. And I think we'll move on to the next slide.
And Jennifer, I just wanted to add, a lot of you may know, if you can go back to the other side, just 1 sec, that's okay, about Senator Ben Cramer. So, many of you are from Maryland, and you know that he is reintroducing a bill that would ensure a Holocaust and genocide unit in both middle and high schools. And my understanding is that that is still under review, but the Department of Education in Maryland did say in the meantime, they were going to go ahead and update their requirements for their schools in the absence of the mandate being official yet. And so that's great, but the question remains, does that mean that a mandate is still needed? And the reason that they think that it is because if we leave it to the Board of Education and then there's turnover among that staff, then they may loosen up the requirements that were set, whereas a mandate is a more enforceable thing. And so I think that's part of the difference between kind of a mandate and then just suggested curriculum from the Board of Education. So just and I think we dropped the link in for the for that information into the chat.
Yes, we did.
Great. Okay, so then I'll go on. Great. So another piece we wanted to speak about that we see as encouraging and hopeful is that there really has been a significant increase in the last 2 decades or so in professional development opportunities for teachers. Certainly in the time since TOLI's been around, or just a little before, kind of in the early 2000s, you see the growth of many ways in which teachers can attend programs with other interested educators to deepen their content knowledge, their pedagogical strategies, and also, as our next bullet point says here, very, very importantly, to deepen their ties to networks of like-minded educators. So I will say, TOLI is very much based in a network model. We have now several thousand teachers who have been to our programs, and hundreds of them are connected through our listserv. And we try to find creative ways to bring them together, because it is very difficult to be the lone teacher in your building who's committed to this work and trying to do it well. So, when we have these programs grow up, they offer both, opportunities to engage with testimony and teaching tools and resources to learn from other teachers like yourself who, like you, have chosen to spend summer months or weekends or whatever it is at programs like that one. And it means that when you go out into the world, you know that you have colleagues in your state, across the country, all over the world, internationally perhaps, who, like you, are very committed to this. And this is absolutely critical, and I think it'll be part of what we talk about when we get to some of the challenges. How do teachers sort of stay focused, stay strong, kind of face up to the challenges that are in their classrooms right now. We also find there's lots of really helpful cross-pollination. So over the years, as TOLI seminars have gone on, we'll find we've accepted a cohort of 25 people in New York, and 2 of them traveled to Poland together 5 years ago, and 3 of them were in DC. And, it's really, really nice. So we feel that kind of emerging cohort of educators who've been able to avail themselves of programs like these coming together as a kind of almost I don't know, new force, right? They bring this education knowledge, like look at all the places Nicole has been able to be. So then she, to me, embodies, right, the best of the writing project, the museum in DC, you know, what TOLI can offer. And she brings them together in her classroom, and then she can offer them locally to teachers in her state. So that's been a really important development. And I know, of course, critical to all of us is the way that these things then impact students. So, you know, I'm not good at presenting things like this, but if you think about one teacher who chooses to attend professional development programs, deepen her knowledge, you know, the number of students she reaches, right? The kind of incremental reach over time of that teacher is just, it's incredible, right? Because she becomes increasingly knowledgeable and skilled and experienced, and her students continue to benefit from that. So, you know, it's one of the real blessings of my work that even through, you know, very challenging times, I know that all the teachers who've been through TOLI programs are out there, you know, working to create district-wide programs, or, you know, the kinds of programs that Nicole is doing. We have a grants program that we offer to teachers who've graduated from our seminars, and I see them doing amazing classroom and community work with the grant funding that they received from us. So there's a direct impact on the students in the classes of the teachers who are able to be part of these programs. And I think Nicole is going to speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the trickle down is, as Jennifer said, it's incredible. So, you know, I went to TOLI and then I came back, and then in my seminar, I had two teachers. One was a French teacher, one was a German teacher. And by the way, neither one Jewish, they just had this passion. And so as part of our seminar, we had them come up with some project that they could then you know, immediately use in their classrooms. And a lot of times when people apply to these seminars, they're like, well, I'm a math teacher, like I can't do this. I'm like, yes, you can, because there's all it is, what it takes from a teacher to be able to do this is passion. And once you have that passion, really anything can be done. As long as you embrace that role, there's a way. And so what these two teachers did, and this happened to be at my high school, because our first cohort, you know, drew a lot from the teachers that I already knew, but they created this model of the Degenerate Art exhibit from 1937. And this was when Hitler was saying he objected to the ambiguity of a lot of avant-garde art pieces, saying that they reflected Jewish and communist influences that could endanger public security and order. And so the foreign language classes were studying this. And what they did is they turned their hallway, they have a whole hallway in our school, into this exhibit for an entire month. And there were QR codes where kids could get more information. The whole thing is created on a Google Classroom, which I believe we shared the link to that. But this was 100% student driven. And so the young people are embracing these lessons that the Holocaust educators are learning. So you see on the left, there's silhouettes. And so those were done by some AP and dual enrollment foreign language students. And it was supposed to symbolize, like as you walked into the hallway, it was Germans going to the exhibit in Germany. And then on the way out, it was symbolic of the Jews going to the concentration camps because of their considered degenerate art. The one on the right is a Matisse piece that all of the students recreated pieces that were part of, that were considered degenerate during that time. And they were able to adapt the pieces and create kind of their own. And so this was, there was a cat, and the student chose to replace the cat with a dog. But, you know, there's a lot in there that was objected to. It was the bright colors, it was the chaos, it was the ambiguity of the piece, the surrealism of it. And so by recreating it, the students understand what was objected to, and they can almost see the ridiculousness of what was objected to just by going through this process. And the art was displayed for a week. And it was really an amazing thing. So this is we just wanted to share an example of student work that kind of comes out of a lot of this professional development, and in a unique way. It's not always in the history classroom, so it can be in any way, shape, or form. However,
Right.
let's go to our next slide.
So having said all that,
Having said all that,
we do want to move into some of the challenges. Yep.
yeah. So we're gonna now talk about challenges, because that's great, right? We're doing a lot of really good things. So like a lot of teachers are getting these professional development experiences, and a lot of students are benefiting from that. And for every student that does, it's just a trickle down effect. But there are some issues, and so for whatever reason, we do face a lot of parental and community backlash, especially in the last year or so. And I teach in Loudoun County, Virginia. And, our goal for this school year was to not make the national news. And of course, we've not succeeded in that, because we keep just doing things that are against this. So I just wanted to share this clip. This is it was an SNL clip, and I'll go ahead and share it, and just to show you how kind of broad this backlash is, and then we'll kind of talk about it. So Jennifer, do you want to click that link?
Hi, I'm so mad I'm literally shaking right now. Forget COVID, the real threat is critical race theory being taught in our schools. My question is, what is it? And why am I mad about it?
So, you've probably heard critical race theory. It would take us probably another 2-hour Zoom to even go into what it is. And that's something with Jennifer's academic background, she probably understands, but most people don't. And what's important to know about it is not something that we're teaching in school. It's just not. But it's really a challenge to fight this irrational argument about kind of a non-existent problem that is coming up so widespread and really across the country. My county, I serve as the equity lead in my school. And as part of that, we do have something called culturally responsive teaching, which unfortunately shares the same acronym as critical race theory, CRT, but we've actually changed that. Now we're calling it culturally responsive instruction. But what is happening in the schools is there's a big movement to expand the lens from which we teach in the classroom. So students can see themselves in the primary source documents they're reading, in the books that they're reading, and in every way in the classroom. And that is one step towards a more equitable teaching environment. But unfortunately, it has been taken in a very negative way. And it's not just in Loudoun County, it's all over, where there's a lot of opposition to something that we're not even doing. So that's a really big challenge. And then there are these, orders that are coming down. Some are in progress, some have happened. But like, for instance, in Loudoun County, we had with the new administration came a hotline, and parents were encouraged to call this hotline if they heard of anything divisive being taught in the classrooms. Well, divisive is a very subjective word. And so, it put teachers really, really on edge, because, pretty much anything I do on a daily basis could be in some way, shape, or form considered divisive. What I love that happened because of this is that the hotline was flooded with another group of parents that just sang the praises of teachers and what was happening in the classroom. So that backfired. And then there's one that is still, it hasn't been approved, but it hasn't been shot down yet. And that is where teachers are going to be required to share their curriculum, again, of anything divisive that they might teach during the year, with parents in the community at the start of the school year. Whole lot of problems with that. We can't teach in a differentiated environment where we're kind of teaching towards the needs of whatever class we have at the time. If we're doing that, it just takes away a lot of what we as teachers do organically. But the biggest problem with that is what it does to teachers. And actually, I'll talk about that in a minute, because the book banning is part of that too. And then I'll talk about how the effect that all of these things have had on teachers. So, in Tennessee, they banned the book Mouse. again, a similar reaction as to the hotline, where Mouse very quickly it sold more copies than it probably ever had in its history because it was banned. But it's this censorship and this fear of teaching something that might upset someone or might be seen as blaming someone for what actually happened in history. So this is the New Yorker cartoon that we liked that kind of shows that. So it's like, I think the other books are like history, science, and Mouse, right? You got to get your books from, a shady guy in the corner because it's not allowed officially in the classroom anymore. But what all of this comes to is teachers. And what happens to teachers is that some freeze in the light of this. When we're told we can't do all of these things, some teachers just don't know, it paralyzes them. And then they go back to teaching the very basics that they know are safe and they're not going to get in trouble for. I mean, this is a job, this is their livelihood, and they can't afford to take those risks. And then you have other teachers who are willing to take the risks because they feel that if they do it and they're called out on it, then it could showcase the ridiculousness of all of this. Needless to say, I'm in the latter category, but it's just a very kind of big brother oversight on what is happening in the classrooms. And I'm going to share one last thing before we shift to a more positive tone. So these are some challenges that we face. And this quote that I'm going to share with you is from the history chair at my high school. And I asked him, given all of these restrictions that are put on teachers, how is that affecting your history teachers? And because, history, it's going to affect history teachers differently than it affects people in the English classroom. And I teach English, and at least in English, there is room for creative thought. There's room for critical thinking. We can have Socratic seminars and talk about the pros and cons. At least now we can, right? A lot of teachers feel like they can't. But in the history classroom, you're teaching facts. So what he said is, well, you cannot teach about the Holocaust without fully sanitizing it. And how do you do that? In US history, when they learn about America's response, we would potentially need to leave out the parts where America didn't respond well, like with the St. Louis. Our teachers are already making informal changes, like asking our students not to write from the perspective of a Holocaust survivor or victim. So I know that sounds harsh, but it is the reality that is happening in the classroom today. However, there are some things that we can do.
I think, Nicole, we were going to mention one other just difficult piece before we moved on.
Oh, yep, go ahead.
So I feel somehow like the bearer of bad tidings. But, when Nikki and I were talking about what should we have on our minds right now, what would we want to share with an interested audience, we thought probably this is on people's minds. It's so much in the news and so much in our lives. But this is, what's being documented as a rise of anti-Semitism here at home. Really astonishing numbers that Nikki was able to find. And, I'm guessing this is not unfamiliar to most of this audience. And so, it's not lost on us that this is the climate in which teachers working now are doing their work, which means many different things. Whether you're in a community where an incident has happened, whether you have a student this has happened to, whether you have students who may have families who are okay with it. I mean, really, when we say what is the state of Holocaust education today, and we look at numbers like this, we have to realize that each individual teacher may be interacting with this moment in a very different way, right? And so to me, that also brings me always back to the need to really understand the local picture as well as the national climate. But these are different numbers than when I began doing this work, and it feels very much a part of the thinking around education in this field. And Nikki, you're going to talk a bit.
Yeah, and okay, so there are a lot of these incidents that happen, and for some reason, because they just aren't paid a lot of attention to in the school system, I don't know why. However, I will say we had an incident just 2 weeks ago. I run the Jewish Student Union at my high school, and we went to the middle school to get some, recruit the 8th graders for some of the clubs. So we had, the Black Student Union, the Muslim Student Association, but lots of even non-cultural clubs. And my JSU students were manning the booth, and all of a sudden there's a group of 8th graders, and this kid, they take this kid and they kind of pushed him into our display, and they said, oh, look, there are the Jews. Here's a German. We want to give you guys a German. And they pushed the kid who they were saying was a German into our Jewish display. And it was very disheartening to my students, and they were very upset about it. But I will say the middle school reacted really, really quickly. They weren't there at the time, the administration, but within a day, they had talked to all the parents involved, all the students involved. And because it happened to be right before Yom HaShoah, they actually had a special program where the kids involved had to do something extra, but the entire school was given some additional programming on Yom HaShoah. So I think that was good. But my point with bringing that up is just that it does happen, and it happens on a micro level as well as a macro level. And a lot of times these micro level things aren't seen or reported. So I think the number, sadly, is even higher than the number that that Jennifer was quoting.
So just keeping all this in mind, and kind of going back to some of where we started, which is what's happening now, and what are some of the things that are going on? What are some of the things we can do? So again, I sometimes think I have a strangely rich and wonderful experience with all of this, can make me kind of optimistic, but it's sort of my job to be optimistic or strong and help hold up these networks. But there is really amazing work going on in the rooms of TOLI teachers and other committed teachers. Nicole showed, the artwork from those 2 teachers in her seminar from this summer, and even just the kind of response that she just described on the part of schools and administrators are to me really encouraging in terms of, having resources, having people understand that education is important, and reaching out when they need that kind of support. TOLI's initial mission was working specifically with rural teachers, with a sense on the part of our board of directors that there was likely a need for resources in those places. So we had a kind of unique start to our programs. At our first couple of summers, we worked exclusively with rural teachers recruited through the National Writing Project. So, when I look at a map of the United States, I absolutely know that I have colleagues and friends in every single state. Every single one of them is teaching about this subject in a committed and very deep way. And so I have this understanding that there is a fabric that connects them in, what might be to someone from a major city or from the DC area, a very surprising place, and where you might not imagine that this work is going on. I think that work that also helps support teachers get out there and speak about what they're doing and open up their classrooms, just like this webinar that you've made available to us to do today, where Nicole can share with you what she's doing. This is absolutely crucial because the work is going on and the support is needed, and teachers need opportunities to share what their struggles are and what their successes are, so that we as citizens can understand what's happening in our classrooms beyond just the headlines that we might be reading, right? And so Nicole's like, this is where you should talk about the book again. So I'm like, okay, but because I was an editor, it's easy to talk about the work of the contributors, but it really felt like a great service to help teachers who bring their work forward. And I want to just bring us back to the beginning of the call. Notice Nicole said, I did all these things, and then I became a teacher and I did this work. And so what I know now from listening and doing professional development is, and then I became a teacher and I got a job. There was a whole process that goes into that, right? That does not happen overnight. That happens through serious work and dedication, and availing yourself of opportunities and looking around you and continuing to grow and learn. So I think it's up to us also to understand what it is that helps teachers do that. TOLI is clearly involved in helping to do that. And after we were running programs in the United States for a few years, we began to offer them in Europe as well through close and wonderful colleagues of mine. We've run in more than 10 countries in Europe now. And again, over 1,000 teachers in Europe have attended TOLI programs, and they're deeply committed to this work. So helping teachers to do the work, understanding what they need, and making sure that we understand what the job is and what it looks like now seems really important, and understanding what the current practices are, and understanding all the ways that teachers do find ways to do their work and to continue to advance their work in very innovative ways, despite all the challenges we just outlined for you.
And then one of the, I think Shelley dropped the link in the chat, but just one thing, Loudoun County, because my dad had come to speak at the school so many times, there was a couple of newspaper clippings, and so they came to me and asked to do this video. And so we're dropping the link for you, but it's a 10-minute video that actually won 2 regional Emmy Awards last year. But it's about our Adopt a Survivor program, and that is something we've done for 4 years that actually I got from my first TOLI experience, but it's something that I was able to adapt, and we would bring multiple survivors, local survivors. And luckily, I'm in the DC area, so that was a little easier than in other places, where they share their stories in small settings with students, and the students would then pledge to adopt their story and tell them every year as during Holocaust Remembrance Days in January and on Yom HaShoah. And we gave them little candles that have the name on it and reminder of the dates. And remember, these are students that most of them are not Jewish. And a lot of them, we did this during a summit that we held. So a lot of them were from other countries. And so these students went back to their countries with a pledge to talk about the survivor story, who they heard at least twice a year. So DMV is the Washington, DC area. So that is, that's just one thing that I'm really proud of that we did as a county. And what's good about that too, is that all the schools that wouldn't have anything else to do on Yom HaShoah, they pull this video and they can show that. And it's very, very, it's all about students, and it's about them taking our stories and carrying them on to the next generation. And I think in my feeling, that is the most important thing that we can do, is to pass on this knowledge and this passion to the next generation. And we do that through teachers, and then we do that through the students that the teachers are reaching. So there is a lot of good stuff happening. And then we just, on our last slide, we just talk about the idea again of door to door, where we're just passing it on, keeping the conversation alive. As descendants of of Holocaust survivors, to me, the most important thing that you can do is to find your way to do that. For some people, it's writing. For some people, it's art. For some people, it is simply recording their stories online for their grandchildren. But whatever we can do to keep it alive, that is what is going to keep those stories going, because it's the next generation that we need to put it in the hands of, because they're the ones that are going to perpetuate our legacies. And then, of course, the as Jennifer talked about, the education groups, the Holocaust Museum has really upped their efforts. The National Education Act has made it sort of given them a grant of money where they are making things available to teachers all over the country and internationally, I'm sure, so that teachers who have never ever taught about Holocaust before are now able to do it easily by pulling up resources from the museum website. Of course, number 3 is probably our trickiest thing, how we are going to continue teaching in the impending absence of live survivor testimonies. But I think that's something that we're going to grapple with for a while. I don't think that there's an easy answer for that one. I know a lot of you have probably heard about the holograms and different things that are happening. I think there's been mixed reviews on that, but honestly, I feel like capturing whatever survivor testimonies we have, and even as our 2Gs and 3Gs, capturing what we know is one of the best things we can do. And in terms of and connecting it with other genocides. I know that there's also, there's a lot of, this is also a tricky area, but I will say for, April was National Genocide Awareness Month, and we had speakers 3 mornings in April. One was from the Cambodian genocide, one was from the Armenian genocide, and then we had welcomed Louise Lawrence Israels to come. So even though we don't want to make any comparisons, it gives it more awareness. It just gives it more view. And that was a really powerful series of events that we did. And then of course, finally, I think we can just advocate. We can encourage our children to advocate. And all of this is really to just keep the conversation alive. Jennifer, do you have anything to add before we hand it back over to Shelley?
I mean, I think these are really critical issues that we're facing now. And, in terms of making connections to other genocides, I think students so readily grasp that this subject is important on its own and also important because it resonates and they're ready. So, in all these topics that Nikki's talking about, I just see, the work of TOLI, or the work I want to sort of ask everyone to continue to do, is to find ways to help teachers understand what they individually, as educated people trying to do their best work, need to, teach in ways that are appropriate and supportive and nurturing to their classrooms, right? To help guide their students who are feeling connections but need to make those carefully and well. To understand what it might be for them individually to have to teach without being able anymore to invite a survivor to their classroom. What will that mean for them? And, asking teachers or allowing and affording teachers time to grapple with these questions meaningfully for themselves and their work, and taking their work very seriously, feels absolutely critical to what we need to do. And, in response to that question, where are we going? That would be another question I would add, like, how can we support teachers to help them find their way through these very real challenges that are with us, that are meaningful, that I think will lead to lively and important conversations and discussions, but teachers need the time and space to be able to make sense of these questions for themselves. And I think that's all.
Wow, thank you so much, Jennifer and Nicole. This was such an enlightening program. I'm personally gratified to hear everything that is going on. We're going to go to a chat session right now. I just introduced myself. I'm Shelley Klein. I'm a member of the Generations After Board of Directors. I'm also a member of the program committee. All of you, please, if you have additional questions, please continue to put them in the chat as I field the questions to our wonderful presenters. So the first question, I'll start with a couple of questions. We had a couple of questions on the mandates. Firstly, do the mandates, whether they're state or federal, do the mandates apply to the K-12 arena, or they're not just limited to high school, are they? Or what can you tell us about the grade levels that they cover?
My understanding is really it's 6 through 12, because it's really in 7th and 8th grade that they are actually teaching about it. I think in younger grades, it's going to be approached. I mean, it is kind of, I think Jennifer taught me this word, curriculum creep, where it sort of creeps down to the lower levels, but probably not, the mandates would not cover that. And I also saw someone had mentioned in the chat about Hebrew schools. I think that's where Hebrew schools are going to, for at least for Jewish children, that's where they may learn about it at a younger age.
And that it's not my term, that curricular creep, right? But there's a scholar named Simone Schwaber who's written about, we do see it moving into younger and younger grades, but how and why and what that means and what it looks like, that's another Zoom for another day, perhaps. But yeah.
So that actually partially answers another question. I'm hoping this question isn't too general for you to answer, but the question is, those 20 states that have mandates, what's happening in those states in terms of growth? I mean, I guess the question is, how fully implemented is the mandate being in those states? Is there any information you can provide? Or
I mean, I don't think I can answer that in a general way. I don't know if Nikki can, and people who probably could, but it tends to vary quite a bit. I mean, I know I can hold up, just because we have TOLI colleagues who are very involved in it. In Michigan, for instance, they launched an amazing website with real resources, and there was deep support for developing curriculum materials. And I see someone just shared a wonderful other resource from Michigan. So, you know, in that state I can offer, but my sense is that it varies, and I wouldn't want to try to speak to all of them at once. I don't know, Nikki, if you feel.
Yeah, and I do know, like from Virginia, when I talked to our department chair, because Virginia does have the mandate, it's still so much teacher discretion. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the curriculum is really, really wide, I know, in most states. And so they could choose to do the Holocaust for a day. They could choose to do it for 2 weeks. So it's in there, but a lot of it isn't prescribed. And so the teacher discretion can really dictate how much is done and how deep it is done.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions about TOLI. Do the teachers, I guess we're implementing the TOLI
model.
Model, thank you. I was looking for the right word. Do they give feedback to TOLI about how TOLI has guided their teachers?
Yes. So I'm not sure. I feel like there's a question maybe behind that question. I mean, I can mention that some years ago, we did a very broad external study. You know, our sense was we've been doing it for about 10 years. It was a decade. It was time to take a look at ourselves. You know, we do evaluations at the end of the summer. We do them 1 year out internally. But we had someone come in and send out a, you know, pretty formal study and quantitative processing of results and all those kinds of really formalized things. And, you know, tooting my own horn, but we were ranked extremely highly by the teachers who attended both our national program and our satellite seminars. And I really want to say that, you know, of course, that speaks to the caliber of our leaders, and you're getting a taste of what they're like today. But also, you know, just for me, supported this idea that teachers need time to articulate for themselves where they stand in relationship to their work. And so that the model that TOLI uses, again, which advances or prioritizes the use of writing and the use of inquiry and interactive pedagogy, right? We are not a content delivery system. You will not come to a TOLI seminar and sit in a room and have things deposited into your brain that we then assume you would know what to do with. That's not what we do, right? We ask you to learn with us, to respond to what you're learning, to think about what it might look like in your classroom, to develop an action plan before you leave. I mean, all kinds of ways that we ask you to interact deeply with the material. And I think the kind of response we get from teachers has to do with their having been given time in a TOLI seminar to get to do that work, right? To engage deeply with the subject, to engage deeply in thinking about their own practice. And I think, you know, no matter what the mandate, no matter what you're being told to do or asked to do, you need that space. So I think that's the answer to the question, that yes, you know, we got feedback after 1 year out and we keep in touch with people. But also, you know, formally, we did get overwhelmingly positive responses, truly overwhelming. And I can mention that I think in 2017 we had the idea to have a conference where we would invite all of the graduates from the first 10 years of our New York City programs to join us for a 3-day kind of, you know, reinvigorating, reconnecting, deepening your knowledge and your practice kind of conference. So we offered that if they could get themselves to Detroit, which is where we held the conference, as both a city with a rich history and a kind of a hub, and again, our very talented Michigan teachers on the ground, we would offer learning opportunities, social opportunities, and we would house them and feed them. So we had 10 years of programs, and fully 50% of our program graduates attended that conference, which to me was an incredible, you know, number of people who chose to give up a 3-day weekend to come be together, both with members of their own cohorts and other TOLI teachers they had never met before. And it was, you know, a truly amazing experience. And again, I think speaks to the hunger of teachers in our programs to continue with us, continue learning in this way. So I feel a little like I'm tooting my own horn, but somebody else. So I'm very deeply proud to do this work.
And somebody just asked, is there a link to the study results that you just referenced?
Do you know what's funny? There really should be. And we didn't. No, there isn't, not because we don't mean to, but because our website should probably offer more in the way of that. And I'm sorry that I don't have a way to share that with you, but as we think about updates to our website, I'll think about how we might do that, because it would benefit us to make that available. And I appreciate that question.
And we did post the link to the website so people can periodically.
Yeah. But it would be great to share that information. I promise that it's really true. But, yeah.
I hope, I'm not giving you any questions that are unfair, but there was a question. Are you aware of other, programs in other countries, maybe any other global programs that do something similar to TOLI? How widespread a movement is this, I guess?
Sure. I mean, the field of Holocaust education has grown has grown globally. And I can speak to, TOLI itself has programs partnering with local hosts and organizations in Europe, and again, in more than 10 countries. And then I know there's a great museum, many of the programs and other, I'm babbling.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there are programs globally. There are Holocaust centers that offer professional development for teachers in many other countries, from South Africa to other places around the world. I believe that if you look at the Association of Holocaust Organizations website, the acronym is AHO, you can find a list of member organizations there. I forget the number, but it's quite a few. Many of them obviously are in the United States, but many of them are overseas. And then I believe, I can try to find it as we move on to the next question, but there's another website that can offer that information in more detail than I can. I mean, I would argue in a way that, but the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA, also has a list of international member organizations. I have not come across another organization that works quite in the way we do with the close relationship to the National Writing Project, but there are many other wonderful, innovative, forward-thinking programs that I love and admire. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think what's unique about TOLI is that they do reach out to teachers of multiple faiths and multiple disciplines. I did participate in the Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem offers a lot of teacher seminars too, and well, I don't know if they're still bringing people there, but that was primarily geared towards religious school teachers. And so I was part of a cohort there with them, and that's very good too. It's just a different, it's just geared towards a different group. So I think there are, based on what group there's a lot of different organizations. And then of course the Holocaust Museum has a lot of training programs as well. But I do think what is unique, and I don't want this to sound like a TOLI commercial, but obviously Jennifer and I are very passionate. But what's unique is that it does span the different disciplines and the faiths, and it's that network. And sometimes the organizations can get too big, and it's having that small network of teachers that you can connect with. And the one other thing I just wanted to add to this part of the conversation is, with any of these professional development groups or cohorts or trainings, this is the first year in a long time where we're having trouble filling seats. And that goes back to our challenges slide, that unfortunately, there's a lot of things preventing teachers from taking advantage of a lot of these opportunities. And so I think that's something that we really, really have to address, because we don't want to stop with the momentum. We have so many good things happening. We don't want that to stop in its tracks.
And sort of as a segue to that, there was a question, is there any coordination with public libraries, with TOLI or other?
I mean, certainly within TOLI, a number of our teachers have done, series. So they've helped curate speakers, and they've worked with communities. And again, our sense is that, you want this knowledge that you have to lead to action, right? And often that might be community-based. One of the teachers in the book, and Risha, who Nikki quoted earlier, who was on our slide in Kentucky, she did a library series. Other people have worked with local art galleries to host student exhibits there. I mean, our strong sense is that community work is really effective and helpful. And so, how do you empower teachers again to nurture that work, right? So that's what I would say. If you're sitting in a summer seminar, you want to give a teacher time to think about what would you really like to see happen in your community? What would be a good way to reach students, but also parents and people who live in your area, right? So that might be one. And in terms of formal coordination, I don't know. I mean, I think it's the ALA, or the American Library Association. It's amazing and does wonderful work. And we have school librarians who've come to our seminars and done amazing work in their schools and their districts. So I can't speak to a formal coordination, but I know that it's a very happy marriage between classroom teachers and librarians, and amazing things can happen. Yeah.
Thank you. So we're getting near to where we're going to have to cut this off, but there have been a couple of questions basically about how can we best support teachers' efforts in sharing. So for 2Gs and 3Gs and survivors who come to speak in the classroom, I'm trying to think behind this question, what the motivation is for this question. Is there something specific that they can do in speaking to classrooms that can help support the TOLI effort?
So I want to say one quick thing, and then I want to turn it over to Nicole.
Yeah.
I just will say that my own students, when I taught my seminars, this notion of making the Holocaust present for students feels very important to me. So, what members of second and third generation do in embodying, by coming into a classroom in a way is showing, there might be someone walking past you on the street, not only who's a survivor, but whose parents were survivors, or whose grandparents are survivors, and that it's very much still with us. And I think making that present for students, to me, feels very important. And now I totally want to turn it over.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I feel it's be present, tell your stories, continue to tell your stories, engage your children and your grandchildren to tell those stories, and just keep the conversation alive. In supporting the teachers, that's the biggest help. And I guess, advocacy is part of it, just like having our voices heard, knowing that we're not out there alone is really, really helpful. And yeah, I don't know. I wish there was more concrete things I could say, but I think just knowing that there's support out there, and if I can come up with more direct ways that that you can help, you can be sure you'll hear from me.
It's only a tiny little question, right?
But I think, we talk about in the book, and in TOLI, the notion of valuing teacher voices. So if we were to agree on this call, for instance, in this space, that, teachers have a certain responsibility and obligation to this topic, and that also people whose family legacy, endows them with a certain responsibility, or, you've chosen to take that up as a responsibility, then sort of, okay, how do we work together? Asking questions of teachers, what can I do to be helpful? Is there anything you need? Could I, I think just making space for those teachers' voices and asking them what they might find helpful is a really critical step in all of this, because I think that doesn't happen nearly enough in the world.
And maybe encourage your friends and neighbors not to go up into school boards and rage against CRT.
Well, and actually, I'm going to make this the last question. It's quite an important question, but I think it's also a huge question. So I will put it out there because it is an important question, but see what you just try and do your best with it. But basically, the question is, what do you suggest within the school setting when we encounter pushback, false narratives, and desecration, not just from students, but from other teachers, administrators, and of course, parents? I think there's probably many different answers, but
my approach to that has always been, instead of taking it on, I just continue to forge forward in a positive way. So when they're like, well, you guys are teaching CRT, I'm like, I'm not sure if you know about some of the positive things that we're doing. Like, look at our Adopt a Survivor program. Like, here's a way we're doing this. Like, oh, I didn't know about that. So I think one way is to sort of, I know it's a simplistic answer, but just to show people all the positive that is being done. So I don't know, it's difficult.
I think that's, sorry.
Go ahead.
But I think it is, in a way, it's so specific to your context. I would never want to say to anyone, depending on their environment, this is what you should do because I say so. I think that, knowing where you can find support, what are your support networks and who are the people who will help you in that situation would be my first question. What do you need? And forming a plan with people around you who can help support you so that you're not alone, because they will know your area and what your climate is. Are you the only one who's going to push back, and you need to reach out beyond your local context, or are there a group of you who can work together in the kind of way Nikki described before? So it is hard to answer that, as Nikki was saying, in a broad way.
Good advice.
And I just wanted to address one thing I'm just seeing in the chat right now. Someone was saying how we have to remember that we're all teachers. And I love that. Like, this is not just for teachers in the classroom. Like, we all have this responsibility, especially given who we are. And so I really want to echo that comment that as much as all the things we're saying can be done at any level. So thank you all, and really appreciate everybody being here and listening, listening to ways and asking about ways that you can help.
Thank you, Nicole and Jennifer, so much. This was such a great program. I think I can speak for everybody. We learned so much, and we're so glad that you're doing what you do. I also want to thank the program committee for their work in creating the program, and to Ephraim Katsir for his outstanding technical assistance. And finally, I'd like to extend our appreciation to everybody who has joined us today. You will also, after the program, receive a feedback survey by email. So we hope that you will complete that. And if you enjoyed our program today or any of our previous programs, you're not already a member of the Generations After, we invite you to join us if you're a 2G, or to make a donation to our website, www.genafterdc.com. And we want to thank those of you who have already either paid dues or made donations to Generations After. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and please be sure to join us for our next program, which is called Becoming a Richie Boy, an Inside Story, and that will be held on July 24th. So thank you, everyone. Thanks again. Nikki and Jennifer.
May I just add one final note?
Yes, please.
Generations After is in the process of reestablishing a speakers bureau. And the purpose is to do a lot of what Nikki and Jennifer were recommending to tell the stories. If you're interested, you can get more information by emailing generationsAfterDC@gmail.com. And we welcome anybody to join us. We also have, in case you're not aware, we also have two writers groups, and we're currently in the process of trying to get an anthology of our work published. And Nikki is one of the members of our writers group. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And as Shelley said, we hope that you'll join us in July for our Richie Boys program. Enjoy the rest of the day.